I want to welcome you to Salmon, Idaho for the 18th of August, 2005. It's an unusual day. Today is the day that would have marked Lewis's 31st birthday. Lewis turned 31 years of age 200 years ago today, and he was here in the Salmon Valley, and that's an important thing. Just a few days ago, 6 days ago, Lewis, Drouillard, Shields, and McNeil crossed over the Continental Divide, came down into this valley where they met with the Shoshone Indian. So the first human beings that they had seen since they had left the Mandan villages. So all of these last months as we've crossed across Montana, it's important that you understand that while we did talk to people, that the original expedition would not have seen any human beings. So this was a watershed week for the original expedition. They came over Lemhi Pass, made their way down into this valley, and here they found the Shoshone people, the people who Sacagawea called her family. This was her homeland, her birthplace. And we're going to visit today with a couple of people who are from this area, who are going to talk about two specific things which make this valley so important in the story of Lewis and Clark. And those two things are horses and Sacagawea. And we're going to talk about those things. And you notice I say Sacagawea. When we were in North Dakota, we said Sacagawea, and that was the pronunciation used there by the Mandan Hidatsa Arikara people. We're here in Sacagawea's homeland, and here the name used for the woman that we know as Mrs. Charbonneau, or Bird Woman, is indeed Sacagawea, and we're going to talk about that a little bit in just a moment. I'd like to do a little bit of administrative piece here at the beginning and remind people that they can send their questions and comments to us at Lewis and Clark, LEWISANDCLARK, all spelled out, Lewis and Clark, at Clayton, CLAYTON.K12.mo.us. And you can find that right there on the web page that you're watching today's broadcast on, and of course all these broadcasts will be archived. Again, I'd like to apologize for some of the technical issues that we've been dealing with. We're not going to be able to show you the footage we've had for the last couple of weeks because of some computer issues and some other technical things. We'll try to get that up on an archived site, archived on the website in just a few days, and so that you can see the area, the beautiful, beautiful area that exists between the Three Forks of the Missouri River and up the Jefferson, the Beaverhead, and ultimately up here to Lemhi Pass, and we'll be able to get that video footage online for you to share. So having made our way through the mire of the technical issues, we're going to talk today a little bit with our guests. If I could go to preset 1, if Ginger, you could take us to preset 1. And we're going to be visiting today with a number of people. And Fred, thanks so much. And Ginger zooming us out a little bit there. We're going to talk to a couple of people. Fred Snook, who is an attorney here, a former judge in Salmon, Idaho. We're going to be talking with Fred about horses. And we'll learn a little bit more about why Fred's the person we're going to talk to about horses. We're also meeting with Roger Nottestead and Dwina, and I'm sorry, Dwina. Nussbaum. And Pomp's stand-in for today. And so we're visiting with these folks. Roger and Dwina are involved with a production of Sacagawea reenactment, or actually a story that's bigger than just Sacagawea, but about the Corps coming here. We're going to talk about that in just a little bit. And you're originally from Australia, and so there's an interesting story about how you got interested in Sacagawea, or why a person from Australia would be interested in Sacagawea. So since we are kind of running late a little bit and Fred needs to get out of here, Fred, very quickly, when Lewis and Clark came over the pass, they were looking for horses. That was the, that was the driving force between Lewis's advance movement, and then when they got here, of course, they found some horses, they got the baggage over, then they ended up getting a lot more horses here before they moved on up the Salmon River. This area has always been sort of an epicenter of horses, I guess.
That's correct, Scott. That you'll recall, Kamehameha had some reservations because a number of horses had just been stolen from the local tribe. But yet, when they come over, the Indians still have a large number of horses here. And yes, if they had not been able to trade for those horses, basically the expedition would have been stalled here in Lemhi County, or the Lemhi Valley, because the Salmon River was impassable, and they're into August, and they barely made it back over the mountains to continue to the Snake River, the Clearwater, the Snake and Columbia.
And there's snow on those mountains,
right,
which we saw yesterday when we crossed Lemhi.
Right, and we want to state that yesterday, Captain and his band, Churchill Clark and Jay, I don't recall Jay's last name.
Rockin', yes, right.
Three of them that have been reenacting this all across the continent yesterday. I was fortunate enough to be able to ride with them over Limhi Pass when they were recreating what happened 200 years ago and brought the horses over. And, you know, that Captain Lewis portrayed by Scott, that was just great, and I'll always remember that.
Well, there's an interesting story. We talk about the fact that these horses were here, they found these horses, they needed to get these horses and move on. But we talk about, you know, then and now and what makes, you know, why there were horses here. Of course, this is an interesting place. They're getting horses, the Shoshone actually had gotten horses from south of here, I guess, over the prior 100 to maybe even as much as 200 years or so. But for the Spanish, at some point, trade is happening over the previous century. Horses are coming into this area.
Right, and south through the tribes, and we know by the time of Lewis and Clark that the Nez Perce have their horses. You know, they're even farther north and west of here, and that the Nez Perce have been traveling from eastern Oregon and Washington and western Idaho across a trail that Lewis and Clark missed, and coming here to this valley for salmon and to proceed on for buffalo and to also just trade and visit the Shoshone that are living here. And that trail we believe had been in existence upwards of 100 years by the time Lewis and Clark had come through.
And that being a horse trail.
Right.
And so, just the other day we heard Jack Gladstone, who many of our people, the folks who watch our broadcast and who follow Lewis Clark know Jack Gladstone. Jack Gladstone, who's Blackfoot, was talking about the other day about the Blackfoot getting their horses early on from the Shoshone. When they first saw horses, they were Shoshone who they had seen with the horses. And so there's this evolution of horses coming in here. Now, a lot of times people will think about the Plains Indian and the horse culture of the plains, but for those folks who have seen the footage of Montana, western Montana particularly, it's a dry, arid place, and while the horse did play a part with some of the tribes, of course, there weren't any tribes who were really calling that western Montana home at that time. But when you come over Limhi Pass, and we discussed this the other day, there is and you're going to see footage of this on the broadcasts in the future, and some of our stock and the footage that we will have archived here shortly. But there is a dramatic change when you come over Limhi Pass with regard to terrain. It's lush. There's lots of water here, lots of grasses growing in this area. So this is a place that is just ideal for horses at any rate.
Well, that would be correct. And then you were talking about in your journeys across the country that you were amazed at how many horses are still here in Limhi Valley today. You know, that we were talking yesterday that you're just seeing horses everywhere, not large bands, but just that all the people, or a lot of the people still own horses here. And the reasons for that is probably twofold. After the development of Fort Limhi, 1855 and on, and then the Leesburg explosion in 1866, and the white settlement of the valley, obviously at that time horses were the mode of transportation. So we have the Native Americans that had their horses, and in our history book that I was just looking at here today, there's a picture of the Indians driving a band of loose horses through town. You know, so we had all these horses, and then we had all of this importation of these other horses by the settlers, or the raising of those. My great-grandfather, and we saw part of his range yesterday when we were riding. I would kid my dad, because my dad had 100 registered horses in the 1960s. And Mom and Dad, or my mom would always say, Dad, you have too many horses. And he'd say, well, his dad and granddad had, my great-granddad ran up to 300 horses out on his range, and Grandpa had 200 to 300 horses on his range. So Dad thought, 100 horses was
no big deal.
I mean, yeah, why are we complaining about this?
And that's exactly right. You'd mentioned that they talk in the journals about the fact that they get here, they had just lost a lot of horses to their enemies, who had raided, and yet they talk about the fact that there's still hundreds of horses here, and that each man, or each family, each man had their own string of horses, and we still see that playing out here today.
And just there on the Bar Double T Ranch that we started our ride yesterday, goes down into the valley on the Montana side, and that's called Horse Prairie.
Right.
And so that means there's Horse Prairie just right adjacent to us, the Limhi Valley. But the point was that the Limhi Valley is very, very isolated, and was very late to have any, railroad didn't get here until 1908 or 9. We still today have no freeway system. The paved roads didn't come in. Highway 28 wasn't paved until the late 1940s and early 50s. The point was, horses were still a used method of transportation here years after they'd been replaced by automobiles, elsewhere. And the Big Hole, literally right over these mountains from us, they continued to use horses in their haying operations, well into the 60s and 70s, when nationwide everybody had switched to tractors quite a while before that.
I think they still do.
And here in our valley, there was a big use of horses up to the 1950s. And so horses were used and were a necessary tool here a lot longer than in other parts. And then, now today's horses, most of those, quote, aren't used in that capacity, but they're used for pleasure and just people riding or raising horses. And as you and I talked, we have Idaho's premier horse sale is here in Salmon, Idaho, a town of 3,000.
Now, who runs that sale?
Fred Snuck.
Well, and Fred, give Fred a little plug. This huge horse sale that does take place here, your family actually started that sale.
Right, 1971. And I was the manager that first year, and total sales were 8,000. And this year, total sales were 320-some thousand. But people bring horses from Calgary, Canada, and Phoenix, Arizona, to a town of 3,000. To sell horses here in Salmon. There is something. And people come from New York and Pennsylvania and across the country to buy horses here. So just it's just a coincidence, if that's the right word, but it's strange that people descend on this small isolated town for the buying and selling of horses.
Well, it is, and that's part of what the exciting thing about the journey we're on right now is walking through both the past and the present. We understand that oftentimes people will say how much things have changed, but in some ways it's how little things have changed. And Salmon, Idaho is still not only horse friendly, but it is a destination for the acquiring of horses, as it was 200 years ago for Merriweather Lewis. So.
And the only family plug I've got to put in on that is, yesterday we crossed, and that was the 200th. But actually, in our family history, my great-grandfather came over Limhi Pass 139 years ago. And so I'm probably the only one in our family to my generation that hadn't ridden a horse over that. Because my great-granddad, my granddad freighted over it for years, my granduncle, my cousins, not my cousins, my grand-cousins, all of them talk of going back and forth over Limhi Pass.
And I think it's important also for any students who will ultimately watch this and work with a teacher on it, or for the general population who's watching our broadcast to understand that we are in a closed-in place where we are rated. There are mountains everywhere around us, and in order to get to Salmon, Idaho, this is an arduous task. You can drive a car in today, but even with a car, it's a difficult thing. The old gears are grinding going up these hills, getting over and around these mountain passes. So when we talk about the hardy stock of folks who came over here 139 years ago, this is an extremely isolated place, remains so. And so getting over Limhi Pass is more than it may sound like we're just crossing over something, and when you see it, it even looks like it's a gentle rise from the Montana side. But this was a difficult place to get to.
It absolutely was. And then most people, once you get here, if you stay very long, you become too poor and you can't ever leave.
Well, it's a great place to end up. If that's the way you have to bottom out, that's not a bad place to do it. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And that sort of leads us a little...
And I know you need to get to these folks, and the only other thing that we need to record is yesterday we were able to ride by the birthplace of Sacagawea.
Absolutely.
There's a monument down on the road that marks it, but we were actually at the actual birthplace up Patee Creek.
That beautiful area there where the springs were starting to come out of the hills and actually were the true source waters for the Columbia River, which of course Lewis and Clark was looking for. And Fred, I know you need to go. You've got court today, and I think today you're representing someone else. You're not on the it's going before the judge, are you? Okay. Thank you so much. And we'll see you. We're going to be here for a few days. We want to thank Fred Stuck for being here, so thank you very much.
And thank you for inviting me on that ride yesterday.
Well, we appreciate it.
See you.
See you, Fred.
And if there's any questions or comments, we'd hope that those can be answered. We're kind of handicapped today technically, so if you get those questions and comments, they may not be answered immediately on the broadcast today, but we'll try to take a look at those online and get right back with you and get an answer to you. We're going to turn our attention now with Roger and Dwayne, and both of these folks have been working on a staged reenactment, I guess maybe almost more of a passion play or more kind of performance that's taking place here at the new Sacagawea Center. I had the good fortune 2 years ago of being out here when the Sacagawea Center was opened up, and we've seen a lot of places across the country, Lewis and Clark interpretive centers and all, and sometimes there's some repetition, and you see 3 or 4 or 10 or 12 of those Lewis and Clark centers, and you start to want for something new and different, and actually that's what's great about this place here. This place here has a completely different focus. It's focused on Sacagawea and the story of her life, and the role she played in the expedition, and moreover, the geographic place from where she emanated, and it is absolutely beautiful. The one thing, as somebody who does theater myself, sometimes I'm really, a little jealous because you all have absolutely the best set designer in the world, and your sets are incredible. Their sets being the mountains that are surrounding these folks, and we're going to put some images on the website so you can see this. But you all are doing a performance out at the Sacagawea Center, telling a story out there, and it plays out in front of the mountains that really framed this story to begin with. So can you tell us a little bit about how this started, Roger? I met Roger 2 years ago, and tell us about how this came to pass.
I guess originally, Scott, I went to a national convention in Montana, and the big table there, it was at Great Falls, and they had representatives from Idaho and around the region, and they went around the room and they asked what these different cities were going to do, and of course Salmon wasn't doing anything, and I said, we're going to do a reenactment, not ever having considered doing the reenactment. From there, I wrote the grant, which was funded by the Idaho Governor's Lewis and Clark Trail Committee, and I started the research and started making the costumes. To date, the gal who stitched them up, hand-sewn, brain-tan deer skins, over 400 hours in these costumes, totaling over $10,000. And from there, Dwayne got involved in the local committee with me. I'm the chair and she's the vice chair. And with her theatrical background, it has evolved to this.
Well, I think there's an interesting story here. I was here 2 years ago, and you were trying to get it off the ground. And I was flattered, and you asked me if I'd come over and walk through the deal as Lewis while the narration was going on, and we did that. And of course, you've now got a large number of people working on this. You got a little more support probably than you had then in terms of manpower, woman power, and all those things. And but what I find fascinating, though, Dwayne, I mean, not that somebody would get involved or somebody would be interested in Sacagawea or Lewis and Clark, but you're from Australia, and quite frankly, I think this is. How did you hear? Did you know about Sacagawea when you lived in Australia?
Yes, I did actually. She was probably the only person I could name out of from the States, from living in Australia, because when I was a child, my oldest sister, Erica, was an avid reader, book reader, and she would read books that were like tomes, and one of those books was the story of Sacagawea, the big thick one that I haven't actually finished myself, but
By Walden.
yeah, by Walden, yeah, and so she was just really into that, and so I knew the name and I knew the story just from her, and so when I came over to the States, I ended up in Salmon, Idaho, with river rafting, and I didn't realize actually at first that this was, had any significance with Sacagawea until the Bicentennial Committee, the Lewis and Clark Bicentennial Committee, got going, and I got involved with that because of my interest, because of the fact that we run trips on the river down through where Clark did his reconnaissance of the Salmon River. So just as part of my learning about the canyon that, we take guests down, I wanted to know everything there could be to know about the history and everything, the geology and everything else. So I joined the committee, and then through there, that's how I found out that there was actually a link back.
So, not that, what was it about Sacagawea that you found fascinating enough to get, for her to stand out in your memory?
I think just there's a romantic quality about her being just a heroic figure. I can't tell you. I can't put my finger on it. I was too young to really know. I just know that name and this special feeling about Sacagawea and being native to the country and a woman and against all the odds and just I don't have any specific things that made me remember her, but just the fact that she's known worldwide, and people here in Lemhi County in Salmon I think don't realize how much children and adults of all around the world have a special place for Sacagawea in their heart, whether they know the specifics about it or not. Like me, I didn't know any specifics, but I just knew of her, my sister talking about her, and hearing the name and just hearing just the bits and pieces about her. Nothing I could put in concrete.
Now, Roger told me the other day, and with kind of mixed emotions, he said that he'd been working on this thing, and he said, then you got here and you took a look at that script and you said, well, we got to change some things. So what was it that you wanted people to leave the production thinking about? What was it that when you got involved with it, you wanted to make sure, and I know you're the director of the production, so what was it that
I wrote it. That's
right.
Which is that's the difference. When I read it, I caught the end of the reenactment that you were involved with, and my parents had been here at the time, and so they gave me a bit of a rundown of what they'd seen, and what I only just caught the last bit when everybody was leaving the stage, and so after I read the script that Roger had, it was really just a narrator giving context to the section that was being read, and then the section of journals that was of interest in its entirety. And I just looked at it and thought that this was, a lot of it was boring. Sorry. We went northwest 360 degrees southeast or something, for 2 miles, and then so it wasn't something that, it was a lot of words, and if people are interested in a lot of words, then they'll read the journal. But I wanted to make it something that would be a learning experience for people who aren't necessarily readers, and they could get a visual learning. And so the two main things I wanted to do was make it scale down what was said of the journals, and just to the points that would lead a story, make it the story, so people could actually get a big overview of what happened from Lewis's perspective, because it's mostly his journals that we read from. So that's the one side of it. I wanted to make that come alive more for the audience who didn't have an understanding or hadn't read the journal specifically. And on the other hand, I really wanted Sacagawea's story and her significance to be woven into the story as well, rather than just a dry reading of journals. Right. I wanted it to be a personal account and have some humanity in it, and have her story, because she's so important in this area to be told, even though there's not a lot of reference to her in the journals that relate to this specific time period.
So do you feel you were successful in that?
She was very successful.
Well, that's good. It's better to have somebody else answer that question for you, isn't it? Well, so you've got the production. You've got one more night of production that's coming up this week, and we're looking forward to get a chance to see that as well. So, what do you think, when this is all over, what do you think the lasting legacy, here in this community? The other night at the reception there, they were talking about this. There was a reception here, and the folks here in Idaho have recognized the fact that this center, they feel, is probably the highlight of what Idaho has contributed to the bicentennial nationally. Do you foresee this production being something that will be part of the community, will go on over the years, each year, that there'll be an opportunity to do this as people come by and make sort of a festival that's centered around this, or will this be a highlight of the festival?
The way I wrote the grant, all the costumes are donated to the Sacagawea Interpretive Center, the costumes and props, and so it's very likely that Little Salmon, Idaho could end up being known for its annual reenactment of Sacagawea and the Lewis and Clark expedition here.
Yeah, I would love to see it remain at least annually, and maybe I mean, it's sort of a fantasy, but it'd be nice to be known weekly too, have a weekly performance through the summer, and people could come from regional, or any tourists coming through the area too could catch it, not just at the one time. So.
Well, it is one of those things. There's so many pieces of the Lewis and Clark story where they talk about, how lucky they were. And, as someone who comes from I come to this story a little bit from a military background and from an explorer background, in that I'm out there riding horses, paddling canoes. And a lot of times I understand that, a lot of the things that are luck maybe aren't really luck. They're good planning. Mm-hmm. And they had a plan, and the plan came together. Who thought that, the odds were stacked against them, but the plan came together. This moment in the story is one that seems to be, it's different than that. When they come here and she is returned to her homeland and she meets her family members here, I mean, this is a really unique moment in the story, and something that people argue whether or not the expedition would have been successful. Would they have made it without her? And a lot of people can argue, and probably rightfully so, that they might have made it without her. But certainly the role that she played was just absolutely, it would be a completely different story without her, obviously. And so it's terrific, and we're excited to be here. Like I said, we're sort of back on the map with regard to humanity at this point. For many, many months, the expedition was crossing this void of human activity, and they come here and they were welcomed with such open arms. And we have been welcomed here as well. Salmon has been an absolutely incredible community. Some communities we go through, they have mixed feelings. They're tired of Lewis and Clark. They've heard enough, this, that, and the other thing. And it was really uplifting and reinvigorating this week to get to Salmon, where the entire community has been behind this, apparently. And there's just been such goodwill, and hospitality has been terrific, just like the original Corps felt here. So we are tight on time. Before we get out of here today, and this is Lewis's birthday date, 231 years old this date, and I'd like very quickly to read from you. If we could go to Precept 2. If we could go to Precept 2. And we'll just simply close today, reminding everybody that if they have questions and comments, so please send them to Lewis and Clark at clayton.k12.mo.us. And again, we have, do we have 15 to 18 minutes left? We do have some time left. Okay, very good. Well, we're going to take just a few more moments and talk about this. I'd like to read for you the journal entry for today. Merriweather Lewis's journal entry for 18 August 1805. It's important to understand Lewis's mental state at this point. He is a young man. He is 31 years of age on this date. He has led an expedition 3/4 of the way across the continent. He knows where he is in relationship to the Columbia River at this point. He understands that he is now faced with a challenge he did not anticipate. When he crossed Limhi Pass, there was not a gentle descent to the Columbia River and ultimately to the ocean. And we're going to show you footage that will reinforce that fact. When you come across Limhi Pass, up a gentle grade from the east, when you get to the top of Limhi, you enter into a very steep valley, and the Bitterroot Mountains are in the distance. Unfortunately, we have not been able to see them the way they saw them. There are fires burning in this area that Lewis and Clark did not encounter. The forest fires here in the west are a serious, serious issue, and we hope that people back east will become aware of the issue with forest fires and issues such as that here in the west, the issues that face the people who live here. And the Bitterroot Mountains, though, were there, and he understood that he was now going to be faced with a challenge he had not anticipated, and that was moving the expedition across a much, much longer stretch of very rugged and daunting mountains. And they would be ultimately successful in that, but he was going to need horses. He was going to have to move north along the Salmon River, and which we will be doing next week. And he's faced with a lot of things that he must be reflecting on. They spend an extended period of time here. This is sort of a long camp for them. They're moving a great deal while they're here back and forth from village area to village area. The Shoshone are on their way east to come down out of the mountains into a little more temperate climate for the winter. And so they're moving around, but basically they're spending an extended period of time in this valley with these people who are the family of Sacagawea and her extended tribe. And so this is a moment of reflection for Merriweather Lewis on many, many levels. And with his birthday, that must have been sort of cause for even greater reflection about his own role, his own humanity. And he writes on this day, "But this day I have completed my 31st year, and conceived that I had in all human probability now existed about half the period which I am to remain in this sublunary world. I reflected that I had as yet done but little, very little indeed, to further the happiness of the human race, or to advance the information of the succeeding generation. I viewed with regret the many hours I have spent in indolence, and now sorely feel the want of that information which those hours would have given me had they been judiciously expended. But since they are past and cannot be recalled, I dashed from me the gloomy thought, and resolved in future to redouble my exertions and at least endeavor to promote those two primary objects of human existence, by giving them the aid of that portion of talents which nature and fortune have bestowed on me, or in future to live for mankind as I have heretofore lived for myself." These are strong and powerful words, Merriweather Lewis writes on this day, words that clearly harken back to the period of time that he spent with Thomas Jefferson. That this is he is on a mission here that he understands the significance of. Although he feels at this point that what he has done has not been of great import and it may not have lasting value. Of course, here we are 200 years later. We are with the nation, much of the nation, engaged in some sort of activity to commemorate or at least reflect on this moment in our nation's history and its importance for us all. And so clearly Merriweather Lewis's work was not for naught, and he did indeed offer a great deal to future generations. And so on behalf of a grateful nation, I think we all today would want to extend a fond remembrance of Merriweather Lewis, and wherever he may be in what strata today, we want to wish him happy birthday, 231 years later. So we want to thank you again for joining us for today's broadcast of Live with Lewis. I want to thank our guests, Fred Snook, a local attorney, former judge here in Salmon County, whose family is one of the first white families to move into this valley, have a long relationship with the native people here, and we're some of the first people to bring registered horses into this valley. And of course, the horse continues to play a major role here in Salmon, and we're going to have some tremendous footage of some of the horses that are here in this valley. Whether they're quarter horses, standard breds, or the paints. Of course, many of the folks here are working with paint horses, which are still continue to play a very important role in the native community. I want to thank Roger Notstead and to thank Dwena Nussbaum for being here, the folks who are involved with the Sacagawea reenactment that's here at the Sacagawea Center. And we'll be able to connect you via our website to many of the websites here in this area. I want to thank the folks at the Wagons West Motel and Resort area here. They've actually been hosting us this week since we've been here. I'm going to be returning today to the trail, just about 15 miles out of town. I'll be returning to the horses, and we'll continue our ride as we make our way into Salmon, as the original expedition did 200 years prior. We came over by foot last week, returned with horse, and are returning now with the horse again, and we will begin to prepare for our ascent of our descent of the Salmon River as we move north, but downstream on the Salmon River, making our way toward Lost Trail Pass, which we will pass in about another 2 weeks, another week and a half, and we'll have some great footage of that. I want to thank you all for joining us once again for Live with Lewis for the 18th of August, 2005, and until we see you again, we proceed on.